So I know for many of you this is the second Epiphany, but it's also the second Christmas. A sense that we lose a lot. And maybe it's not for nothing that this first Guardia that we have in the new year is inaugurated with such a feast of the Epiphany on this day. The Epiphany of the Lord was, and unfortunately I have to use the past tense, was amongst the most celebrated and the revered feasts of the ancient church. It was actually ranked equal with Christmas and Easter Sunday. So important was this feast. Many of the traditions that we actually have during Christmastide are actually part of the Epiphany. It's not for nothing that we sang Adeste Fideles right now. What exactly are we saying? Oh, come, let us adore him. Who is going to adore him? The three kings. This is a reflection of the three kings who have made it to find the child Jesus. The giving of presents, for example, in Christmas is actually derived from the gifts of the Magi that we just heard. The gifts that the Magi gave to the child Jesus in the manger. Many of you might remember. I remember as well my grandmother and my great-grandmother on this day. This is the day we got our Christmas presents. We'd have the 25th, we'd get together and have presents, but on this day, on the Three Kings Day, I always went to my grandmother's house, my cousins, myself, and all the children gathered at my grandmother's house, and she would give us even more presents, because this was the day you get the presents, the Three Kings Day. Even then, she would take us to Cayocho, where there was el desfile de los Tres Reyes Magos, and there were camels. And so it was a big deal. It used to be a big deal, at least. There's a famous English Christmas carol, The 12 Days of Christmas. Today is the 12th day of Christmas, Epiphany. So it's even in our songs. Even the Christmas manger scene would not be completed until today, where you would put the three kings in the scene. In many countries, there were parades. Well, in this one, there used to be one, at least in the country of Miami. We would have our parade. But still, in Germany and Italy, it's a national holiday. That's the vestiges of its importance. For some reason, this feast has faded away, and for the most part, it's forgotten now. It doesn't help that, even though it was for the greater convenience of the faithful, the feast was moved to the closest Sunday. But now the Epiphany is just like any other Sunday. It kind of comes and goes. We barely notice it. It no longer stands out in our modern Christian tradition. It's lost its importance. Unfortunately, many young Catholics as well are ignorant of this feast because it's no longer celebrated. So it's something that we remember of the past. It's a tremendous loss for the Christmas season. What a deficiency of mystery and understanding. The Epiphany of the Lord inspired so much throughout the centuries. Deep philosophical sermons were written for this feast, and you can look at the church fathers. We actually have the collection there in the library of sermons written just for the Epiphany and about the Epiphany. Theological treatises were based on this day. Hymns and the most beautiful art was composed for today. Think of how many Christian songs that you know. We said, "Come, O ye faithful," "We Three Kings." They're all about the Epiphany. And so many of the manger scenes that were painted by the masters are not complete until they have those three wise men in there. Those masters were meditating on this feast today. If we reflect on the immense body of work, of thought, of prayer, of art that concerns the Feast of the Epiphany, one element should stick out. The theme of light. It's everywhere. It's in the prayers that began the Mass. It's going to continue in all the prayers of the Mass. It's going to be in the Gospel and the readings. It's in the antiphon that started this Mass. Light. The analogy of Christ as light is prevalent throughout the Christian tradition, and even more so in the intellectual tradition of the early church. Think about it. Light attracts. You turn on the light at night and all the bugs go right to it. There's something that attracts of light. If we are out in the forest or at sea at night, you see a light, you look at it. It calls your attention. Just as light attracts, so does Christ attract us in mind and in heart. So did the child Jesus attract all peoples to him, even in the manger. And so let me point out 3 instances. There are a lot more, but I only have time for 3, because I can smell the food over here as well.
I don't want to.
Let me point out 3 instances where the notion of light is so poignant and this feast come together. The first mention of Christ as light is found in the days just before Christmas, right after the 17th. There are special antiphons and prayers that are found in the Mass that leads us up to Christmas Day, known as the famous Advent O antiphons, because they all start with O, a vocative. And all of them allude to the prophecies concerning the Messiah, usually from Isaiah. And one of them begins, O oriens, splendor lucis eterne, et sol justitiae, veni et illumina sedentes in tenebris et umbra mortis. O Orient, Oriente, the splendor of eternal light and the sun of justice, come and illuminate those who are seated or stuck in the darkness and in the shadow of death. It's kind of heavy. Unfortunately, we skip that one all the time. Christ is the light who comes from the east. Just as the sun arises in the east and fills the world with light, and no corner of that rising sun, the light that comes out of the rising sun, misses that light, so does the coming of the Lord fill the world with light. That's why most churches originally faced east, the direction of Christian prayer. That's why we call it oriented, because you look to the east where the light comes. We look to where the light shall come, Christ, the light from the east. Yet the light of Christ is not like the light of the sun, though, because the sun eventually sets and goes dark. Christ is the star whose light is greater than the sun, because this one never sets. Whatever has been bathed in the light of Christ cannot remain the same, and the light of Christ transforms everything that it illuminates. And here we find the real meaning of Epiphania, Epiphany. It's a Greek word. Epi, around, phanon, light, illumination all around. The Epiphany was the moment when the light of the Lord's revelation penetrated all humanity and creation became conscious that the Lord was incarnate among us. It takes a while for us to get it, to get something so profound as the mystery of the incarnation, for it to settle in. Just as we need to reread a difficult lesson or study so many times before a test to get it right, the mystery of the incarnation wasn't immediately grasped by everyone on Christmas night. It took some time. 12 days. 12 days that symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel, which is another way in biblical language to mean universality, everyone. It took 12 days for the world to realize what has happened. And so the arrival of the 3 Magi also meant that the light of the Lord had not only reached Israel, but also reached the other nations, as we heard in the second reading. The light of Christ attracts universally all men, not just a select few. The notion of bringing light is present in a second way, and here we got to go to Spanish. La Virgen dio a luz un hijo. Notice how in Spanish we say to give birth, we say dar luz. On one hand, well, yeah, it means literally to bring to the light that child who was shielded in the darkness of the womb. Yet the birth of the Lord was not so much bringing Christ to the light, than it was bringing Christ's light to the world, to the Virgin Mary. Literally, dio luz, she gave light. And so just as the darkness of sin enters the world through the disobedience of Eve, now the redemption of the world enters the world through the Virgin Mother. Just as light envelops all and attracts all back to it, so did the birth of the Lord on Christmas night emit a light that called everyone to Bethlehem. Something was happening in Bethlehem. Something important was going on, and everyone who saw the light knew about it. It's interesting how the master artists could catch the mystery of bringing light into their works. Christ in so many paintings, and if you look at them, is the source of the light that illuminates the scene, the dark manger. Finally, one last analogy of Christ as light on this Epiphany is echoed one more time at the end of Jesus' public life, at the moment of his transfiguration. We hear that on Mount Tabor, the apostles who Jesus took with him were blinded by the light of the transfigured Lord. So is also the way the Lord revealed himself to St. Paul, through blinding light that knocked him off his horse. Even to Moses, the burning bush emits a light. And so the light of Christ is inescapable and transformative. Just as we can see things better and clearer in the light of day, life is only possible on earth because of light. So too will we better see the world and understand it through the light of faith. So too will we be able to cross that dark valley of death and enter in the light of the resurrection on the last day, like the antiphon says. May we rekindle the light of Christ in us today, so that we too may serve as beacons of light to the world that is trying very hard to extinguish the light of Christ and prefers to live in the darkness of ignorance and impiety. Incidentally, today, the rector at the seminary had just sent a prayer that the first Archbishop of the United States composed for the inauguration of George Washington. And it's very interesting because it talks about light, today the Epiphany. Certainly the news and the events of this day do cast a dark specter over this day, over Washington. And so I'll share and conclude with that prayer that Archbishop John Carroll said on the inauguration of this republic. Let the light of your divine wisdom direct the deliberations of Congress and shine forth in all the proceedings and laws formed for our rule and government, so that they may tend to the preservation of peace, the promotion of national happiness, the increase of industry, sobriety, and useful knowledge, and that they may perpetuate to us the blessing of equal liberty. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.